I stared at Flynn, my heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and anger. His words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating me with their callousness. "Why does this house have to be a shrine for your dead husband?" he spat. His eyes narrowed, and his lips curled in disdain. I recoiled as if he had physically struck me. "How can you say that?" I whispered, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Neil was a part of my life, and his memory deserves to be honored." Flynn scoffed, his fingers drumming impatiently on the kitchen counter. "It's been 2 years, Coraline. When are you going to let go and move on?" I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a constant reminder of the void Neil's death had left. His artwork, his sketches, his journals, they're all that's left of him. I can't just erase that part of my life. "Well, maybe it's time you did," Flynn retorted, his voice rising. "I'm your husband now, or have you forgotten that?" His words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. I studied the man before me, the one I had trusted, the one I had allowed into my life after losing Neil. How could he be so callous, so uncaring about the man I had loved with every fiber of my being? "You knew what you were getting into," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You knew about my past, about Neil, and you said you understood." Flynn's expression softened for a moment, but his eyes remained hard and unyielding. "I did understand, Coraline, but I can't keep living in the shadow of a ghost. This is our home, our life together, and I want to start fresh." I felt the familiar sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him, not now. "Start fresh?" I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "By erasing the man I loved, the father of my unborn child?" Flynn's gaze flickered to my belly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something darker cross his features. "That child is the only reason I'm still here," he muttered, his words dripping with venom. A chill ran down my spine as the weight of his words sank in. In that moment, I realized that the man I had married was not the one I thought I knew. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, a hatred and resentment that I had been blind to until now. I drew myself up, summoning every ounce of strength I possessed. "Then maybe it's time for you to leave," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. Flynn's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked almost shocked. But then his expression hardened once again, and he let out a bitter laugh. "Fine," he spat. "Have it your way. Live in your little world of memories and ghosts. But don't come crying to me when reality comes crashing down around you." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of his words and the realization that the man I had trusted had been a stranger all along. As I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of my life with Neil, I couldn't help but let my mind drift back to those happier times. The memories came flooding back, unbidden but welcome. It was at one of Neil's art exhibitions that I first laid eyes on him. He was a rising star in the world of abstract expressionism, his canvases a riot of colors and emotions that seemed to speak directly to my soul. I was captivated, not just by his art, but by the man himself. We struck up a conversation that night, and it was like we had known each other for a lifetime. Our connection was instant, undeniable, and before long, we were inseparable. Neil was a force of nature, his passion for his craft matched only by his love for me. We were partners in every sense of the word, our lives intertwined like the brushstrokes on his canvases. But then, in the blink of an eye, it was all taken away. The accident that claimed Neil's life was a brutal reminder of how fragile our existence truly is. One moment he was by my side, his laughter filling the air, and the next, he was gone, leaving me adrift in a sea of grief and heartache. It was at his memorial service that I met Flynn, one of Neil's most promising students. He approached me with words of condolence and a look of genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Your husband was a true master," he said, his voice soft and comforting. "His work touched so many lives, mine included." I nodded, my throat too tight with emotion to speak. Over the next few weeks, Flynn became a constant presence in my life. He would stop by the gallery, offering to help me sort through Neil's unfinished works and sketches. His kindness and understanding were a balm to my wounded soul. Before I even realized what was happening, we had grown close, our shared love of art and appreciation for Neil's legacy forming an unbreakable bond. Looking back, I can see how vulnerable I was, how desperate I was for someone to fill the void that Neil had left behind. And Flynn, with his charming smile and his seemingly endless patience, was all too happy to step into that role. It wasn't long before he began to push for more, his touches lingering a bit too long, his words taking on a deeper meaning. And in my grief-stricken state, I allowed myself to be swept up in the whirlwind of his affection. We were married within 6 months of Neil's death, a decision that seemed both reckless and inevitable all at once. But now, as I stood in the aftermath of our explosive argument, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. The man who had once seemed so kind, so understanding, had revealed a darker side, one that filled me with a sense of dread I couldn't quite shake. As I clutched Neil's sketchbook to my chest, a silent tear rolled down my cheek. I had been so desperate to hold on to the past that I had opened the door to a future I never could have imagined, a future that promised only pain and betrayal. The months that followed our argument were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about Flynn. As my pregnancy progressed, his behavior became increasingly erratic. One moment, he would be the attentive, doting husband, fussing over me and ensuring I had everything I needed. The next, he would become distant and cold, his eyes filled with a barely concealed resentment. "You're carrying that man's child," he spat one night, his words slicing through me like a knife. I recoiled, instinctively cradling my swollen belly. "This child is a part of me, Flynn, a part of us." He scoffed, his lip curling in disgust. "Don't delude yourself, Coraline. That baby is a constant reminder of the man you truly loved." His words stung, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I loved Neil, yes, but I love you too, Flynn. Can't you see that?" His expression softened for a moment, and I dared to hope that my words had reached him. But then, in the blink of an eye, his features hardened once more. "Love?" he sneered. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You're still clinging to the past, and it's tearing us apart." With that, he turned and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the sinking realization that the man I had married was slipping further and further away. As the weeks passed, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He would spend hours locked away in Neil's old studio, claiming he needed space to work on his own art. But when I tried to enter, he would lash out, accusing me of trying to control him. It was during one of these confrontations that I stumbled upon the truth, a truth so devastating that it shook me to my very core. "You're selling Neil's paintings?" I gasped, my eyes widening in disbelief as I caught sight of the canvases stacked against the wall, price tags hastily scribbled on the back. Flynn froze, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but the lie was written all over his face. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had ever experienced before. "How could you?" I cried, my voice thick with betrayal. "Those paintings are his legacy, his life's work." "And what about my life, Coraline?" he shouted, his composure cracking. "I've been living in his shadow for too long. It's time I stepped out and made a name for myself." I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "Not like this, Flynn. Not by stealing and deceiving." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. "It's too late for that," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I've already set things in motion, and you can't stop me." As he spoke those words, I realized that the man I had married was nothing more than a stranger who had wormed his way into my life and my heart, only to betray me in the most unforgivable way. In that moment, I knew that there was no going back. The bonds that had once tethered us together had been severed, and the only thing left was a deep, burning desire for revenge. The days that followed were a blur of anger and disbelief. I barely slept, my mind whirring with the weight of Flynn's betrayal. How could the man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my heart, have turned out to be such a deceitful, conniving liar? I tried to reason with him, to make him see the error of his ways, but he was like a man possessed. The hunger for recognition, for success, had consumed him utterly, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it, even if it meant destroying the legacy of the man I had loved. "Those paintings are mine now," he snarled, his eyes alight with a manic intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "I'll do with them what I please." I shook my head, my hands instinctively protect behavioring my swollen belly. You're making a mistake, Flynn, a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life. He laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound that seemed to echo off the walls of Neil's studio. Haunt me? Don't you see, Coraline? This is my chance to finally step out of your dead husband's shadow and make a name for myself. I stared at him, aghast, as the full weight of his words sank in. This was about more than just greed or ambition. This was a twisted form of revenge, a sick attempt to erase Neil's memory and claim his legacy as his own. You're a monster, I whispered, my voice thick with revulsion. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something dark and dangerous cross his features. Maybe, he said, his voice low and menacing. But at least I'm alive. With those chilling words, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the studio that had once been a sanctuary for Neil, a place where he had poured his heart and soul into his art. I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs as the gravity of the situation washed over me. How had things spiraled so out of control? How had the man I loved become this twisted, hateful creature? In that moment, I knew that there was no going back. Flynn had crossed a line, and there was only one path forward: retribution. I would stop at nothing to protect Neil's legacy, to ensure that his art, his very essence, was not tarnished by Flynn's greed and deception, even if it meant exposing the man I had once called husband for the fraud he truly was. The next few days passed in a blur as I began to gather evidence of Flynn's misdeeds, meticulously cataloging every piece of Neil's work that he had attempted to sell or pass off as his own. I pored over financial records, searching for any hint of the trail of lies he had left in his wake. And then, one fateful night, the opportunity I had been waiting for presented itself. It was an art exhibition, one of the biggest of the year, and Flynn had managed to secure a coveted spot as a featured artist. As I watched him schmooze and preen, basking in the adulation of the crowd, I felt a surge of white-hot anger course through my veins. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. With a deep breath, I steeled myself and stepped into the spotlight, a stack of damning evidence clutched in my trembling hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice ringing out loud and clear across the hushed gallery, "I have something to show you all." As all eyes turned towards me, I locked gazes with Flynn, his eyes widening in horror as he realized what was about to unfold. "This man," I continued, gesturing towards him, "is a fraud, a liar, and a thief." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning, as I began to lay out the proof of his deception for all to see. In that moment, I knew that there was no turning back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure that justice was served. For Neil, for our child, for the truth. The aftermath of the exhibition was a whirlwind of chaos and emotions. As the truth about Flynn's deception came to light, the art world erupted in a frenzy of outrage and disbelief. I found myself at the center of a storm, fielding countless interviews and questions from reporters eager to get the inside scoop on the scandal that had rocked the community. Through it all, I remained steadfast and unyielding, fueled by a burning desire to see justice served. Flynn, of course, tried to deny it all at first. He painted himself as the victim, claiming that I had fabricated the whole thing out of some twisted desire for revenge. "She's just a bitter, jealous woman," he told anyone who would listen. "She can't stand the fact that I've finally found success on my own merits." But the evidence was damning: financial records, emails, and even eyewitness accounts from those who had seen him attempt to pass off Neil's works as his own. As the weight of the proof mounted, his lies began to unravel, and the true depths of his betrayal were laid bare. It was during one of those media frenzies that I made a discovery that would change everything. "Coraline," a voice called out, cutting through the din of cameras and shouting reporters, "I have something you need to see." I turned to see Tessa, one of my oldest friends and a seasoned journalist, holding a thick manila envelope. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Her expression was grim as she handed me the envelope. "It's proof of Flynn's financial dealings. Bank statements, loan applications, everything." I opened the envelope with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the pages within. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Flynn was drowning in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars owed to creditors, loan sharks, and shady art dealers. He had been living a lie, spending money he didn't have in a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of success. And that's when it all clicked into place. His obsession with selling Neil's paintings, his desperation to make a name for himself, it wasn't just about ego or revenge, it was about survival. He was a con man, a charlatan who had wormed his way into my life and my heart, all in pursuit of a quick payday. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, leaving me reeling and utterly devastated. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let someone like that into my life, into the sanctity of Neil's legacy? But even as the hurt and betrayal threatened to consume me, I knew that I couldn't let it break me. Not now, not when I was so close to achieving the justice I had fought so hard for. With a steely resolve, I gathered the evidence and made my way to the one person who could help me bring Flynn's web of lies crashing down around him. Diana, my oldest friend and one of the most formidable lawyers in the city. As I laid out the proof before her, her eyes widened in disbelief. "This is incredible," she murmured, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and disgust. "He really thought he could get away with it all, didn't he?" I nodded grimly. "He underestimated me." "He underestimated the power of the truth." Diana's gaze met mine, and in that moment I saw a fierce determination burning in her eyes. "Well then," she said, her tone resolute, "let's make sure he pays for every single lie." And with those words, we set in motion a plan that would not only expose Flynn's deception to the world, but ensure that he faced the full consequences of his actions, both legally and professionally. It was time to make him answer for his sins, and I wouldn't stop until justice was served. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media scrutiny. Flynn, backed into a corner, tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence we had amassed was simply too overwhelming to ignore. "You'll never get away with this," he snarled at me during one of our many confrontations. "I'll fight you every step of the way." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Go ahead," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. "The truth is on my side." And it was. With Diana's legal expertise and Tessa's journalistic tenacity, we slowly but surely unraveled the tangled web of lies and deceit that Flynn had woven. Financial records, emails, and even testimony from those who had witnessed his duplicity firsthand, it all painted a damning picture of a man willing to sacrifice everything, including his own integrity, in pursuit of fame and fortune. As the noose tightened around him, Flynn's mask began to slip, revealing the true depths of his depravity. He lashed out at me, hurling insults and threats, desperate to maintain some semblance of control. "You think you've won?" he sneered, his eyes burning with hatred. "You're nothing without me. You'll always be the sad, pathetic widow clinging to her dead husband's ghost." His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. Not this time, not after everything I had been through. "You're wrong, Flynn," I said, my voice unwavering. "I am stronger than you could ever imagine, and I will not rest until you have paid for every single lie." As the legal battles raged on, the art world turned its back on Flynn. One by one, galleries that had once fawned over him now shunned him, their faces twisted in disgust at the depths of his deception. And then, just when it seemed that the walls were closing in on him for good, he made one final, desperate play. A move that would ultimately seal his fate. It was at a prestigious art exhibition, one that had once been a dream for him to attend. But this time, he wasn't there to bask in the glory. He was there to make a statement. As the crowds gathered and the cameras flashed, he strode to the center of the gallery, a familiar canvas clutched in his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, "I am here to set the record straight." I watched from the sidelines, my heart pounding as I realized what he was about to do. "This painting," he continued, holding up the canvas for all to see, "is not mine. It is the work of a true master, a man whose legacy I have sought to tarnish and destroy." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "That's right," Flynn said, his voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "I am a fraud, a liar, and a thief, and I have hurt the one person who trusted me most, my wife." My eyes widened as he turned to face me, his expression a twisted mask of anger and regret. "You were right, Coraline," he said, his voice breaking. "I am a monster, and I deserve everything that's coming to me." With those words, he let the canvas fall to the ground, the sound of its impact echoing through the silent gallery like a gunshot. In that moment, I knew that the battle was won. Flynn had finally admitted defeat, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. As the crowd erupted in a frenzy of shock and outrage, I stood there, frozen, watching as the man I had once loved was led away in disgrace. It was over. The lies, the deception, the endless cycle of betrayal, it had all come to an end. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood by me, their expressions a mix of pride and relief, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had fought for the truth, for justice, and for the memory of the man I had loved. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The aftermath of Flynn's public confession was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media scrutiny. As the evidence of his misdeeds mounted, it became clear that he was facing serious consequences, both professionally and legally. Diana, true to her reputation as a formidable lawyer, left no stone unturned. She meticulously gathered every shred of evidence, every incriminating document and testimony, building an airtight case against Flynn that would ensure he faced the full weight of the law. "He's not going to wriggle his way out of this one," she told me, her eyes steely with determination. "Not after what he's done." And she was right. The charges against Flynn were numerous and damning: fraud, embezzlement, and even grand larceny for his attempts to sell off Neil's artwork. As the legal proceedings dragged on, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me felt a sense of vindication, a satisfaction in knowing that the man who had so callously betrayed me was finally getting what he deserved. But there was also a part of me that couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness, a lingering reminder of the man I had once loved and the dreams we had shared. But those moments of weakness were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming need for justice, not just for myself, but for Neil's memory and the legacy he had left behind. And then, just when I thought the battle was nearing its end, the unthinkable happened. It was an ordinary day, one that had started like any other. I was at home, poring over the latest legal documents and evidence, when a sudden, sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was nothing more than a bout of indigestion or stress. But as the minutes ticked by, the pain grew more intense, more insistent, until I could no longer ignore it. "Diana," I gasped into the phone, my voice strained with panic. "Something's wrong. I think the baby's coming." The next few hours were a blur of chaos and stark clinical efficiency. Diana sprang into action, arranging for an ambulance to rush me to the hospital while simultaneously coordinating with my legal team to ensure that the case against Flynn wouldn't be derailed. Through it all, I clung to her steadying presence, her calm and reassuring voice guiding me through the haze of pain and fear. "You've got this, Coraline," she murmured, gripping my hand tightly as another contraction ripped through me. "You're stronger than you know." And in that moment, as the world around me seemed to spin out of control, her words were like a lifeline, a reminder of everything I had been fighting for. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic activity and agonizing effort. But through it all, I kept my focus, channeling every ounce of my strength and determination into the task at hand. And then, at last, after what felt like an eternity, a tiny cry pierced the air, and a new life, my precious child, was brought into the world. As I cradled the tiny bundle in my arms, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face, I knew that this was what it had all been for. This was the ultimate triumph, the culmination of my journey through the darkness and back into the light. But even as I basked in the warmth of that moment, I knew that the battle was not yet over. There was still one final hurdle to overcome, one last reckoning that needed to be faced. And as I looked down at my beautiful, innocent child, I made a silent vow, a promise that I would see this through to the bitter end, no matter what it took, for her, for Neil, for justice. The days and weeks that followed the birth of my daughter were a whirlwind of emotions, joy, relief, and an overwhelming sense of determination. As I cradled her tiny form in my arms, marveling at the perfection of her delicate features, I couldn't help but feel a surge of protective love, a fierce determination to shield her from the cruelties of the world that had tried so hard to tear me down. "You're safe now, little one," I whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her downy forehead. Mama's got you. But even as I basked in the warmth of that moment, I knew that the battle was far from over. Flynn's reckoning was still looming on the horizon, and I was more determined than ever to see justice served. Diana, my steadfast ally and friend, was by my side every step of the way, her unwavering support and legal expertise proving invaluable as we prepared for the final showdown. "He's not going to get away with this," she said, her voice steely with resolve. "Not after everything he's put you through." And so, with my precious daughter cradled in my arms, I steeled myself for the fight ahead. The courtroom was a sea of hushed whispers and expectant gazes as Flynn was led in, his once confident swagger now replaced by a shambling shuffle, his eyes downcast and haunted. As he took his seat, our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, the charming, passionate artist who had swept me off my feet with his ambition and his dreams. But that moment was fleeting, quickly replaced by the cold, hard reality of the man he had become. A liar, a thief, and a betrayer of the worst kind. As the charges were read aloud, each one a damning indictment of his misdeeds, I felt a strange sense of vindication wash over me. This was it, the moment I had been fighting for, the culmination of months of pain and heartbreak. And yet, even as the evidence mounted and the case against him grew stronger, Flynn remained defiant, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his gaze boring into mine. "You're nothing without me. You'll always be the sad, pathetic widow clinging to her dead husband's ghost." His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. Not this time. Not after everything I had endured. "You're wrong, Flynn," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I am stronger than you could ever imagine, and you are about to face the consequences of your actions." As the trial wore on, the weight of the evidence became too overwhelming for even Flynn's most ardent defenders to ignore. His lies and deceptions were laid bare for all to see, a twisted tapestry of greed and betrayal that left even the most hardened observers shaking their heads in disgust. And then at last, the moment of truth arrived. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces grave and solemn, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The verdict was read aloud, each word ringing like a death knell for Flynn's shattered dreams. Guilty on all counts. As the realization sank in, I saw the last vestiges of defiance drain from Flynn's face, replaced by a hollow, haunted look that spoke volumes of the price he would pay for his misdeeds. In that moment, as he was led away in disgrace, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the endless cycle of pain and heartbreak, it had all come to an end. And as I looked down at my daughter, her innocent eyes gazing up at me with boundless trust, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had fought for the truth, for justice, and for the memory of the man I had loved, and in the end, that was all that mattered.